You know, we as Indian Americans are living in a global world, so it's not fair, I think, today's times to say India versus US. It's just a flat world. Where do you think, if there are, if you may elaborate, the skill sets that we can acquire from India or emerging India, and where US already has its strengths to play on each other to benefit? Because we keep hearing about all this. It's politically motivated.
Yeah.
The stories about outsourcing and stopping the visas, because you require the skills, the resources, regardless of whether you're an American company or a
Right.
global company.
Right. The president of MIT, Susan Hockfield, 2 years ago went with me. We spent a whole week. Last year, Chuck West, who was the president, who is now president of National Academy of Engineering, went with me to India for a week. And it was very interesting to see their observations. MIT is good in coming up with some big breakthroughs because the best minds, the best labs, they all exist there. But what is interesting is that even if you come up with major breakthroughs in technology, they have to get adapted to all the 6 billion people in different ways. So there is a lot of local innovation, local entrepreneurship that happens. And what the rest of the world, what US will learn from India is all about the scaling and low cost. That is, innovation, if you do it in isolation, it does not have much meaning. For example, if an MIT engineer looks at, let's say, the telephone service and says, okay, Verizon makes on an average maybe $40 a month. How do we make all this work at, let's say, $10 a month? Which in isolation would be a dramatic innovation. But you go to India, and in India, they're already doing $4 a month, and you can charge your phone for less than 10 cents, right? And you're adding 15 million phones a month, right? And so, obviously, there is a different type of innovation in terms of the business model, in terms of the way you market it, in terms of the way you build your networks, everything else. So that innovation happens, and most of the time when innovation happens, it happens unknowingly. It's not like people of a country, of a territory sit down and say, we shall innovate. It just happens because of the necessity and just the people coming together and so on. US will probably understand the innovation happening in India a lot better than India itself, because people here have the strength to look at the big picture and so on. And so we need to bring some of those innovative ideas back to US. Let's say, for example, education. You talked about how great the education in India is. Actually, a lot of the stuff in India is totally broken, right? I mean, most of the people who graduate, they cannot really have the skill to do anything or produce revenue for anybody. But because a lot of these companies are growing so fast, let's say the IT companies, they have figured out a way to look at 1 million people, qualify people based on just aptitude, not so much the training, and then train them for 3 months, 4 months, or whatever, and then they start producing revenue. There's no reason as to why, if we had a system in the US to actually check the aptitude of people for $200 and retrain them for a few $1,000s and get them back in the workforce, I think that would be tremendous, because that's not the way we would think here in the US. In the US, we would say, well, maybe $100,000 we can retrain somebody. And so I think it's that low cost and the volume that makes the companies in India innovate lots of new things, whether it's a nano car or a phone or training or whatever. And US needs to be cognizant of what's coming out of that, and maybe bringing some of those innovations back to the US.
You had said earlier that the game for entrepreneurs and the challenges remains the same. It's just that the industries have evolved, the verticals have evolved, but the challenges are pretty much the same that you face compared to what an aspiring entrepreneur today faces. But I want to ask you, because people look up to individuals like yourself as role models. If you were to still throw out a couple of key takeaways for the audience, what do you think are the fundamental elements an entrepreneur should never forget?
Today when I was driving up here, coming through Dearborn and so on, obviously Henry Ford was one of the biggest entrepreneurs, right? So his entrepreneurship was a lot difficult than what we had to go through and what it is today. I think, 25 years ago, when you wanted to become an entrepreneur, it was like a crazy thing to do. It was a big gamble. It wasn't what most people talked about. It's not a conference that you went to where you met 300 other entrepreneurs. Today, what's different is that entrepreneurship can be a career. So people can choose to be entrepreneurs. And typically the entrepreneurial games last for, within 4 or 5 years, you know whether it's going to work or not. If you fail in the first one, you'll get to do it again, and your chances are better second time. If you fail second time, you get to do it again the third time. So I think you can make that a career as opposed to a one-time fatal effort, whether you work or it doesn't work anymore. And because I think the world realizes that there's a value in that entrepreneurship, there's value in that innovative experiment. And people don't penalize you for the failure. As long as you fail for the right reason, they actually look at that as a badge of honor, and you get funded again to do something even in a more responsible fashion. So I think the big difference is that entrepreneurship, you can make entrepreneurship as a career. But what hasn't changed is that every entrepreneurial opportunity, when it comes down to the individual, when he has to pull that plug, when he has to jump off the cliff to take that plunge, I don't know if that's any different.
An ethnicity-based question. Indian Americans who came here primarily came from low middle class background. A lot of emphasis on education.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I've met many great people like yourself. Not many have come from business backgrounds. How do you think they have done so well, and only after coming to this land?
I don't think it's a big mystery. I think usually immigrants always do better. I think when people get dislocated, they always become better entrepreneurs because, out-of-box thinking becomes a very natural thing for anybody who gets dislocated. It's not just Indians coming from India to US. Same thing happens when people from US go to India or China or somewhere else. Because I think when people grow in a certain environment, particularly when they grow with a lot of the comforts, you get to take everything for granted. You don't quite appreciate all the assets that you have. And also, you don't quite see new ways of doing things. Whereas when you come in from outside, you always think a little differently. So one of the things I always talk to young people here in the US about is to make sure that they travel. They get different experiences, and they have to sort of see how people look at things differently. And getting the different perspective and different ways of looking at the same thing, I think is very important.
Almost all entrepreneurs who are very successful say that when they started out, success for them meant creating a good product or service which could be a benefit to the world. The money part wasn't as much in the equation. Most young people want to become an entrepreneur because they could get wealthy. I think that's the wrong notion to begin with. What I'm trying to get at is, A, if you can impart some wisdom as to why that is not the right thing to do. 2, after having achieved so much success, how do you remain humble and always giving back, thinking of giving back to society? And it's a big lesson to learn from you.
Well, I think number one, there's nothing wrong in making money. I mean, making money is a good thing. Having another resource is not a bad thing. But I think if entrepreneurs start a company or start a venture with the hope that they're going to sacrifice a lot, work really, really hard, and in another 3, 4, 5 years or whatever, make it big and happily live ever after, it may be a very disappointing experience. I mean, I think we've had a lot of cases where this actually worked out in the 99-2000 bubble, where people started companies and very quickly got rich and had an exit. But in general, it does not happen. In general, it happens to be a very long journey, and it may take a long time before you see something, or you may not even see anything at the end, right? So I always sort of give the analogy of how, if you go swimming, and if you're a swimmer, if you think you're going to swim 10 laps, after 9 laps you get really tired. The 10th looks very hard. If you think you're going to swim 100 laps, then the 10th one is pretty easy. It's the 99th, which becomes really hard. So I think if you want to really enjoy the entrepreneurship, you should become an entrepreneur because really you enjoy doing that. Number one, you don't look at it as a sacrifice, and number two, you really don't expect that it's going to get rewarded instantly and that you happily live ever after. And if you look at it as a long marathon, then you may get lucky, in which case it's a nice thing to happen. But even if it doesn't happen, you are enjoying, and mentally your mindset is to do it for a long period of time because you enjoy doing it anyway. And so that's why looking at entrepreneurship as a career, I think, is very important. Now, in terms of even after you're successful, I think for you to be, what's happened, for me, happiness is your opportunity to get up in the morning and be excited about the day. Right? If you get up in the morning and if you're excited about the day, you're happy. And that's the best thing about being entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are very optimistic. They always believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And if you live your whole life feeling that tomorrow is going to be better than today, that's not a bad way to live. But to be able to do that, to really have that excitement, you have to reinvent yourself. You have to have a new idea that you're working on, which probably has an equal chance of either working or not working. There's always this feeling that it may work, may not work, right? But you're constantly reinventing yourself, you're coming up with new ideas, you're working on new things. And if you give that up, I think then you sort of hit a dead end. And sometimes what happens in people's career is that they get very lucky and they rise to a level which is way above where they really belong. And then it becomes very hard because now they don't have the humility to come back to what they're good at, and they get stuck. And so you feel sometimes, you see these people who have been successful, but they are really not having fun anymore because they don't have the ability to come down and recreate and do things that they're good at. And they're not good enough to operate at the level where they got to. And so what you don't want to do is to get stuck. I think that's the old thing about rising to a level of incompetence. So you don't want to get too lucky and get to a level of incompetence where you're very unhappy. So you want to continuously be growing.